In the small town of Cedar Falls, Michigan, where dreams often felt as distant as the city lights beyond the horizon, one act of kindness would spark a chain of events so extraordinary that it would forever change the meaning of compassion. Sometimes, the smallest gestures create the biggest miracles, and sometimes the people we help carry secrets that could transform everything we thought we knew about our own lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Rosie's roadside cafe flickered intermittently on that cold February morning, casting dancing shadows across the worn linoleum floor. The smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee hung heavy in the air, mixed with the faint scent of pine cleaner that never quite masked the decades of accumulated wear. Outside, snow fell steadily against the large windows, each flake catching the early morning light before melting into streaks that ran down the glass like tears. Sarah Michelle Thompson wiped her hands on her apron for what felt like the 100th time that morning. At 28, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied the exhaustion etched in the fine lines around her green eyes. Her auburn hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail, revealed a face that had learned to smile, even when her heart felt heavy. She moved with practiced efficiency between the handful of occupied tables, her worn sneakers making soft, squeaking sounds against the floor with each step. The cafe was Cedar Falls' only 24-hour establishment, a beacon for truckers, night shift workers, and anyone else who found themselves awake during the lonely hours when the rest of the world slept. Sarah had been working here for 6 years, ever since she'd graduated from Cedar Falls Community College with an associate degree in early childhood education. That degree hung in a simple frame on her bedroom wall at home, a reminder of dreams that had been carefully folded away like winter clothes in summer. Life had other plans for Sarah. Her father, Michael Thompson, had suffered a massive stroke 3 years ago while working at the lumber mill. The medical bills had arrived like an avalanche, burying the family's modest savings and forcing them to make impossible choices. Her mother, Linda, had taken a part-time job at the local grocery store, but at 62, her arthritis made even simple tasks increasingly difficult. The burden of supporting the family had fallen squarely on Sarah's shoulders, and she had accepted it without complaint, though sometimes late at night she allowed herself to wonder what might have been. The morning rush at Rosie's was predictable in its rhythm. First came the construction workers, men with calloused hands and tired eyes who ordered coffee strong enough to wake the dead and eggs cooked exactly the way their mothers used to make them. They spoke in low voices about weekend plans and complained about their backs, counting quarters and crumpled dollar bills to pay for meals that would fuel them through another day of physical labor. Next arrived the nurses and orderlies, ending their overnight shifts at Cedar Falls General Hospital. They slumped into booths with the particular exhaustion that comes from caring for others throughout the darkest hours, when healing feels most fragile and hope most precious. Sarah always gave them extra coffee and never charged for the second refill. She understood what it meant to give everything you had to people who needed you. The regulars knew Sarah's story, though she never spoke of it directly. They saw it in the way she carefully counted her tips at the end of each shift, organizing the bills and coins with the precision of someone who knew exactly how far each dollar needed to stretch. They noticed how she always volunteered to work, holidays and weekends, how she never complained when her relief called in sick, and how she seemed to find genuine joy in their small victories and celebrations. Mrs. Dorothy Henderson, a retired schoolteacher who came in every Tuesday for scrambled eggs and wheat toast, had tried more than once to help. She'd offered to tutor students in her home and split the earnings with Sarah, suggested applying for grants and scholarships, even mentioned that her nephew owned a small accounting firm in Grand Rapids that might be hiring. Sarah always thanked her with genuine warmth, but politely declined. She had responsibilities here, people who depended on her, and she couldn't risk the uncertainty that came with change. On this particular morning, as Sarah refilled coffee cups and cleared away breakfast, plates she was calculating in her head as she always did. Her father's prescription medications would cost $247 this month. The physical therapy sessions that insurance didn't cover were another $300. The mortgage payment was due in 8 days, and the heating bill had arrived yesterday with an amount that made her stomach tighten with worry. She had learned to break down overwhelming problems into manageable pieces, to focus on today's challenges rather than drowning in tomorrow's possibilities. The lunch crowd would arrive in a few hours, bringing with it the opportunity for better tips. The dinner shift paid even more, and Sarah had arranged to stay late to cover for Jessica, the evening waitress who was home with a sick child. She would work 14 hours today, go home to heat up leftover soup for her parents, help her father with his evening exercises, and fall asleep to the sound of her mother's worried whispers in the next room. But Sarah had learned something important during these difficult years. She had discovered that kindness cost nothing, that a genuine smile could transform someone's entire day, and that treating people with dignity and respect was a choice she could make regardless of her own circumstances. The truckers who stopped at Rosie's often told stories of rude servers and indifferent service at other places, but they always returned here because Sarah remembered their names, asked about their families, and made them feel like human beings, rather than just another order to fill. She had noticed how a kind word could ease the loneliness of the overnight workers, how remembering someone's usual order made them feel seen and valued, and how sometimes the most important thing she could offer wasn't food at all, but simply the acknowledgement that every person who walked through those doors mattered. In a world that often felt cold and disconnected, Sarah had chosen to be a source of warmth. The morning was settling into its familiar rhythm when she first noticed the figure standing outside in the snow. Through the streaked windows, she could see someone in military fatigues, shoulders hunched against the cold, seeming to hesitate before approaching the door. The uniform was unmistakable even from a distance, and Sarah felt her heart skip slightly. Cedar Falls didn't see many active military personnel, and when they did appear, they were usually passing through on their way to somewhere else. The figure stood there for several long minutes, and Sarah found herself glancing toward the window, repeatedly as she went about her tasks. Something about the person's posture suggested uncertainty, perhaps even reluctance. She'd seen that look before in people who were hungry but weren't sure they had enough money for a meal, who wanted to come inside but felt somehow unworthy of taking up space. When the door finally opened, a blast of cold air swept into the cafe, causing several customers to look up from their newspapers and coffee cups. The soldier who entered was young, probably not much older than Sarah herself, with dark hair cut in a regulation style and brown eyes that seemed to carry more weight than someone his age should bear. His uniform was clean but showed signs of wear, and he moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to be constantly aware of his surroundings. He paused just inside the door, scanning the room with the systematic attention of professional training, and Sarah noticed how his gaze lingered on the exits, the other customers, the general layout of the space. It was behavior she recognized from some of the veterans who occasionally passed through Cedar Falls, men and women who had learned that survival sometimes depended on knowing everything about your environment before you relaxed enough to sit down. The soldier chose a table near the back of the cafe, away from the windows and with a clear view of the entire room. Sarah approached with her usual warm smile, notepad ready, but something in his expression made her slow her steps slightly. There was a vulnerability there, carefully masked, but unmistakable to someone who had learned to read the subtle signs of people struggling with more than they could easily carry. The next few minutes would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything Sarah thought she knew about kindness, sacrifice, and the unexpected ways that caring for others could transform not just their lives, but her own as well. Sometimes the most ordinary moments become extraordinary, not because of what we expect to gain, but because of what we're willing to give when no one is watching and nothing is guaranteed in return. Sarah approached the soldier's table with the gentle confidence that came from years of reading people's moods and needs. Up close, she could see the exhaustion that sat heavy on his shoulders like an invisible weight. His name tape read Martinez in bold black letters, and beneath the professional composure, she sensed something fragile, like a person trying very hard to hold themselves together. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice carrying the warmth that had made countless customers feel welcome over the years. "What can I get started for you today?" Corporal David Martinez looked up at her with eyes that seemed older than his. 26 years. For a moment, he appeared startled by her genuine kindness, as if he had expected something different. His hands rested flat on the table, and Sarah noticed the slight tremor in his fingers, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he spoke. David wrapped his hands around the mug as if drawing warmth from it, and Sarah noticed how thin his fingers appeared, how his wedding ring seemed slightly loose. He took a sip and closed his eyes briefly, and in that moment, his carefully maintained composure slipped just enough for her to see the gratitude underneath. "Thank you," he said, and those two words carried more weight than seemed possible. Sarah moved on to check on her other customers, but she found her attention returning to the soldier throughout the morning. He sat nursing that single cup of coffee for over an hour, occasionally checking his phone, sometimes just staring out at the snow-covered street. She refilled his cup twice without being asked, and each time he thanked her with the same quiet intensity. Around 11:30, the morning crowd began to thin out. The construction workers had long since departed for their job sites, and the hospital staff had headed home to catch some sleep before their next shifts. The cafe settled into the peaceful lull that always preceded the lunch rush, and Sarah used the time to wipe down tables and restock napkin dispensers. She was refilling the sugar containers when she heard David's phone ring. His voice, when he answered, was different, more formal, more guarded. "Yes, sir." "No, sir, I understand." "Yes, I'm still in Michigan." "No, sir, I haven't." "I know, sir." "Yes, sir, I'll figure it out." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The conversation was brief, and when it ended, Sarah saw him run his hands through his hair and take a deep, shuddering breath. When he reached for his wallet, she could see his hands were shaking slightly. He pulled out a few crumpled bills and began counting them, his movements becoming increasingly agitated. From her position behind the counter, Sarah watched as David counted and recounted the money, his face growing more frustrated with each tally. She had seen this scene play out many times before with different customers, and she recognized the particular desperation of someone trying to make inadequate resources stretch just a little further. Finally, David called her over with a raised hand. When she approached, she could see the embarrassment coloring his cheeks. "I'm sorry," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I need to ask, how much is the coffee?" $2.50, Sarah replied gently. David nodded and carefully counted out exact change, placing it on the table with the precision of someone who had learned that every penny mattered. As he began to stand, Sarah noticed him sway slightly, catching himself with one hand on the table. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. "Fine," he said quickly, but the word came out more sharply than he probably intended. "Just tired." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, taking in the pallor of his skin, the way his uniform hung a little too loose on his frame, the careful way he moved, as if conserving energy. She made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Wait." "Just a moment," she said, disappearing into the kitchen. David remained standing by his table, clearly confused but too polite to simply leave. Within minutes, Sarah returned carrying a plate loaded with food. Scrambled eggs, bacon, hash browns, wheat toast, and a small bowl of fresh fruit. She set it down in front of his chair and looked at him expectantly. "I can't pay for this," David said quietly, his voice thick with embarrassment and something that might have been desperation. "You don't need to," Sarah replied simply. "It's on the house." "No, I can't accept charity," he said, the words coming out harder than he intended. I don't need—" Sarah held up a gentle hand, stopping his protest. "It's not charity," she said firmly but kindly. "It's breakfast. And around here, we believe that people who serve our country shouldn't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from." David stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. Pride warred with need, training with exhaustion, and ultimately the simple human requirement for sustenance won out. "Thank you," he whispered, sinking back into his chair as if his legs had suddenly become unreliable. As David began to eat, Sarah noticed several things that painted a clearer picture of his situation. He ate slowly but steadily, with the focused attention of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in some time. He cleaned his plate completely, even using his toast to soak up the last traces of egg yolk. When she offered him more coffee, he accepted gratefully, and she noticed how his hands had steadied now that he had food in his system. Other customers began to filter in for the lunch rush, but Sarah found herself checking on David frequently. She learned that he was traveling back to base after emergency leave, that his car had broken down 50 miles outside of Cedar Falls, and that he had been waiting for a bus that wouldn't arrive until evening. He'd spent most of his remaining money on the tow truck and a temporary repair that hadn't held. "The mechanic says it needs a new transmission," David explained when Sarah asked about his travel plans. "That's more than I can afford right now, especially with—" He trailed off, not finishing the sentence. "Especially with what?" Sarah asked gently, refilling his coffee cup. David was quiet for a long moment, staring into his cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My wife is in the hospital back in California. Cancer. The treatments. Our insurance covers some of it, but not everything. I've been sending home everything I can, but it's never enough. I was hoping to get back to base so I could request another advance on my pay, but now—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Sarah understood the impossible mathematics of loving someone who was sick, the way medical bills could devour a family's resources faster than they could be replenished. She thought of her own father's medications, the physical therapy sessions, the constant juggling of payments and priorities. "What's her name?" Sarah asked. "Elena," David said, and for the first time since he had entered the cafe, his face softened, completely. "We've been married 3 years. She's a teacher, elementary school. The kids in her class made her get well cards before I left. She has them taped to the wall next to her bed." Sarah felt her heart tighten. She knew what it was like to watch someone you loved struggle with illness, to feel helpless in the face of circumstances beyond your control. She also knew what it was like to count every dollar and still come up short. "How long do you have before you need to report back?" she asked. 48 hours, David replied. "If I'm late, there will be consequences. But if I can't get back—" Again, he didn't finish the thought, but Sarah could imagine the complications that would cascade from such a situation. Military discipline was not known for its flexibility, especially for young soldiers without significant rank or influence. As the lunch rush picked up around them, Sarah found herself thinking about David's situation. She watched him check his phone repeatedly, presumably hoping for good news about his transportation situation. She saw him calculating and recalculating on a napkin, trying to find a mathematical solution to an impossible problem. When Bob Hendricks, the cafe's owner, emerged from the back office to help with the lunch crowd, Sarah approached him quietly. "The soldier at table 12, she said, nodding toward David. "I made his breakfast." Bob, a heavy-set man in his 50s with kind eyes and a practical nature, looked over at David and then back at Sarah. "Everything all right?" "He's trying to get back to base," Sarah explained briefly. "Car broke down. My wife's sick. Just need a helping hand." Bob nodded slowly. He had owned Rosie's for 15 years and had seen Sarah's instincts about people prove correct more times than he could count. "Put it on my tab," he said simply, but Sarah shook her head. "I've got it covered." The afternoon wore on, and David remained at his table, making phone calls and growing increasingly frustrated with each conversation. Sarah pieced together his situation from the fragments she overheard. The bus had been delayed. The car repair would take at least 2 days, even if he could afford it, and his options were rapidly dwindling. As her shift moved toward evening, Sarah found herself making another decision that surprised even her. She approached David's table one final time, this time carrying a small paper bag, along with his check. "I packed you some sandwiches for the road," she said, setting the bag down next to his elbow. "And I have a proposition for you." David looked up at Sarah with confusion and wariness. In his experience, propositions from strangers rarely led to anything good, especially when you were already in a vulnerable position. But something in Sarah's expression, the genuine concern mixed with determination, made him pause rather than immediately decline. "What kind of proposition?" he asked cautiously. Sarah pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, her movements deliberate and thoughtful. She had been wrestling with this decision for the past hour, running through the practical implications and potential consequences. But every time she looked at David, she saw her father in those first weeks after his stroke, proud and scared and trying desperately to maintain his dignity while his world fell apart. "I get off work in 20 minutes, she said. "My car isn't much to look at, but it's reliable. I could drive you to the base." David blinked in surprise. That's over 400 miles. You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," Sarah replied. "Look, I know we just met, and I know this sounds crazy, but I can see you're in trouble. Real trouble. And sometimes when people are in trouble, other people need to step up and help. That's just how the world is supposed to work." David shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. I can't pay you for gas, let alone your time. I've got maybe $30 left to my name, and I need to save that for food on the road." "I'm not asking you to pay me," Sarah said firmly. "I'm offering to help." "But why?" David's voice carried a note of bewilderment that went beyond simple confusion. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you do this?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering how to explain something that wasn't entirely logical, even to herself. "My dad always told me that character is what you do when nobody's watching and nothing's in it for you. 3 years ago, he had a stroke. Suddenly, our whole family was in the position you're in now, good people facing impossible circumstances through no fault of their own. We learned real fast who was willing to help and who wasn't." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes meeting his. "Right now, you're part of my community. You're sitting in this cafe. You're in trouble, and I have the ability to help, so that's what I'm going to do." David sat in silence for a long moment, processing her words. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "You said your dad taught you about character. What would he say about you driving an 8-hour round trip to help a stranger?" Sarah smiled for the first time since she had sat down. He'd probably say I was crazy, but then he'd ask if I had enough gas money and tell me to drive carefully. Despite everything, David found himself almost smiling. And your family? What are they going to think when you don't come home tonight? They'll understand, Sarah said with quiet confidence. My mom will worry, but she'll understand. That's who she raised me to be. David picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip, buying himself time to think. The logical part of his mind catalogued all the reasons why this was a bad idea. He didn't know this woman. She was already struggling financially. The drive would be dangerous in the snow, and he had no way to repay her kindness. But the desperate part of his mind, the part that had been calculating and recalculating impossible mathematics for weeks, whispered that this might be his only chance to get back to base on time. I could lose my job over this, he said quietly. If I don't report back on time, I'll face disciplinary action, possibly discharge. And if that happens, Elena loses her health insurance. She loses everything. Then we better make sure you get back on time, Sarah said simply. David looked out. The window at the snow, which had intensified since morning. The weather reports had been calling for a significant storm, and the roads between Michigan and his base in Kentucky were notoriously treacherous in winter conditions. He thought about Elena, probably sleeping in her hospital bed at this very moment, trusting him to find a way to make everything work out. This is insane, he said finally. Probably, Sarah agreed, but sometimes insane is the only option that makes sense. David set down his coffee cup and looked directly at her. If we do this, and I'm not saying we should, but if we do, I need you to know that I'm not some kind of hero. I'm just a soldier who's in over his head and scared out of his mind. I'm not worth the risk you'd be taking. Sarah's expression grew serious. Let me tell you something about worth. Every person who walks through that door has worth. The construction workers who come in before dawn, the nurses who work double shifts, the truckers who drive all night to keep the country running, they all have worth. And so do you. She stood up from the table, her decision clearly made. I'm going to finish my shift and get my things. If you want to accept my help, meet me out back by the dumpster in 20 minutes. If you don't, I understand, and there's no hard feelings. As Sarah walked away, David felt something shift inside his chest. He had been carrying the weight of his impossible situation alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer to share the burden. He thought about Elena, about the promise he had made to her before he left, that he would find a way to make everything okay. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of activity. Sarah finished her closing duties with the efficiency of someone who had done the same tasks thousands of times before. She counted her tips, $43.62, and tucked the money into her apron pocket. She said goodbye to Bob, who was staying late to handle the dinner rush, and made her way to the small employee break room to collect her coat and purse. In the break room, she pulled out her phone and called her mother. Mom, it's me. I'm going to be late tonight. Really late. Linda Thompson's voice carried the particular tone of maternal concern that could span any distance. How late is really late? And why do you sound like you're about to do something I'm going to worry about? Sarah explained the situation as briefly as possible, leaving out the parts that would cause her mother to panic. She focused on the facts. A soldier needed help getting back to base. She had offered to drive him, and she would be back sometime the next day. Sarah Michelle Thompson, her mother said, using the full name that had always signaled serious maternal concern. Tell me you're not about to drive to Kentucky in a snowstorm with a complete stranger. I'm not driving to Kentucky in a snowstorm with a complete stranger, Sarah replied automatically, then paused. Okay, I am driving to Kentucky in a snowstorm with a complete stranger, but Mom, you should see this guy. He's in real trouble, and I think I'm the only person who can help him. Linda sighed deeply. "You're just like your father, you know that? Same big heart, same stubborn streak, same complete inability to walk away from people who need help." "Is that a bad thing?" Sarah asked. "It's a dangerous thing," Linda replied. "But it's also a beautiful thing. Just be careful, sweetheart, and call me every few hours so I know you're alive." "I will," Sarah promised. "Give Dad my love, and tell him I'll explain everything when I get back." After ending the call, Sarah sat in the break room for a moment, allowing herself to fully process what she was about to do. She was going to drive through a snowstorm to help a man she had known for less than 6 hours. She was going to spend her gas money and her time, and she was going to do it without any guarantee of safety or success. But as she thought about David's face when he talked about his wife, about the way his hands had shaken when he counted his money, about the quiet desperation in his voice when he talked about the consequences of being late, she knew she was making the right choice. She gathered her things and made her way to the back door of the cafe. The snow was falling harder now, and the parking lot was covered in a fresh layer of white. Her car, a 12-year-old Honda Civic with rust spots and a temperamental heater, sat under one of the few working streetlights. David was already waiting by the dumpster, his military duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He looked uncertain, as if he still couldn't quite believe this was happening. "You came," Sarah said, stating the obvious. "I came," he confirmed. "But I want to say something first." Sarah nodded, waiting. "If we do this, if you really drive me all the way to base, I want you to know that I will never forget it. And someday, somehow, I will find a way to pay you back. Not just the money, but this kindness. I don't know how, but I will." Sarah smiled and pulled her car keys from her pocket. "Let's worry about getting you back to base first. Everything else can wait." As they walked toward her car, David looked up at the snow-filled sky and wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life or accepting the greatest gift he had ever been offered. Time would tell. But for now, he was choosing to trust in the kindness of a stranger who had already given him more than he had any right to expect. Sarah unlocked the car and started the engine, listening to the familiar rumble of the motor that had carried her faithfully through 6 years of work and worry. She had no idea that this decision, made in a moment of pure compassion, would set in motion events that would change not just David's life, but her own in ways she could never have imagined. The Honda's headlights cut through the falling snow as Sarah and David pulled onto Interstate 75, beginning what would become one of the most significant journeys of both their lives. The car's heater wheezed and struggled against the February cold, and Sarah had to periodically wipe condensation from the inside of the windshield, but the engine ran steady and true. For the first hour, they drove in relative silence, both processing the magnitude of what they had undertaken. The storm had intensified, reducing visibility to perhaps 50 yards in any direction. Other vehicles crept along the highway at cautious speeds, their taillights appearing and disappearing in the swirling white like red ghosts. David sat rigidly in the passenger seat, clearly uncomfortable with his inability to contribute to their situation beyond providing directions. Every few minutes he would check his phone for messages from Elena or updates about the weather conditions ahead. The silence between them wasn't awkward exactly, but it carried the weight of two people who had made a profound decision based on very little actual knowledge of each other. "Tell me about your wife," Sarah said finally, her eyes never leaving the treacherous road ahead. "How did you meet?" David's posture relaxed slightly at the question. "College," he said, and for the first time since entering the cafe, his voice carried a note of genuine warmth. "University of California at Davis. I was studying engineering. She was in the education program. We had the same American literature class." He paused, and Sarah could sense him settling into the memory. "I was terrible at literature." could handle calculus and physics all day long, but asked me to analyze a poem, and I was completely lost. Elena sat next to me, and she could see I was struggling. "She helped you?" Sarah asked, carefully navigating around a semi-truck that was moving particularly slowly in the right lane. "More than helped. She basically tutored me through the entire semester, wouldn't take any money for it either. Said education should be free and that we were all in it together." David's voice grew softer. She had this way of explaining things that made them make sense. Not just the literature, but everything. Life, I guess. Sarah smiled despite the challenging driving conditions. Sounds like she was a natural teacher even then. "The best," David confirmed. "Her students absolutely adore her. She makes learning feel like an adventure instead of a chore. Even with everything she's going through now, she still talks about getting back to her classroom. The principal is holding her position for her, but I know she worries about her kids." They passed a road sign indicating they had crossed into Ohio. The snow seemed even heavier here, and Sarah had to reduce their speed further. She calculated distances and time in her head, trying to determine if they would reach David's base before his deadline. "What about you?" David asked. "Did you always want to work in a restaurant?" Sarah laughed, but there was no bitterness in it. "Not exactly. I actually have a degree in early childhood education. Always planned to teach kindergarten or first grade." "What happened?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering how much to share. "Life happened. Dad got sick, bills piled up, and somebody needed to keep the family afloat. The teaching job I had lined up didn't pay enough to cover everything we needed." David turned to look at her more directly. "That must have been hard, giving up your dream like that." "I didn't give it up," Sarah said firmly. "I postponed it. There's a difference. Someday, when things stabilize, I'll find my way back to teaching. But right now, my family needs me to be practical." They drove through several small Ohio towns, their main streets deserted except for the occasional snowplow or police car. The radio provided a steady stream of weather updates and travel advisories, most of them urging people to stay off the roads unless absolutely necessary. "Do you think we're crazy for doing this?" David asked during a particularly intense stretch of driving where the snow seemed to be falling horizontally. "Probably," Sarah admitted, "but I think there's a difference between crazy and necessary. Sometimes you have to do things that don't make logical sense because they make human sense." David considered this. "Elena would like you," he said after a while. "She has the same philosophy, always taking in stray cats, helping students whose families can't afford school supplies, volunteering at the homeless shelter even when she's exhausted from teaching all day. She sounds wonderful." "She is." David's voice grew heavy again. "That's why this is so hard. She's the strongest person I know, but watching her go through the treatments, she tries to stay positive for my sake, but I can see how scared she is. And I'm supposed to be her husband, supposed to protect her and take care of her, but I can't fight cancer. I can't make the treatments less painful or the bills smaller or any of it easier." Sarah navigated around a car that had slid partially. Off the road, its hazard lights blinking weakly in the storm. "You're doing what you can," she said. "You're serving your country to provide for her. You took emergency leave to be with her when she needed you, and you're moving heaven and earth to get back to base so you don't lose the job that pays for her insurance. That sounds like protecting and taking care of her to me, but it doesn't feel like enough." "It never does," Sarah said quietly. "When someone you love is suffering, nothing you can do ever feels like enough. But that doesn't mean it isn't everything." They stopped for gas in Toledo, where David insisted on pumping despite Sarah's protests. While he filled the tank, she went inside to buy coffee and snacks for the road. The station attendant, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, looked at them with concern. "You folks sure you want to be out in this weather?" he asked. "Highway patrols, recommending that people stay put until morning. We don't really have a choice," Sarah replied, paying for the gas and coffee. "Sometimes you just have to push through." Back in the car, David offered to drive, but Sarah declined. "I know how this car handles," she said. "Besides, you need to rest. You look like you haven't slept in days." David didn't argue with that assessment. The stress of Elena's illness, combined with the financial pressure and his transportation problems, had left him running on adrenaline and caffeine for longer than was sustainable. As they pulled back onto the highway, he found his eyelids growing heavy despite his efforts to stay alert. "It's okay," Sarah said, noticing his struggle. "Get some sleep. I'll wake you up if I need directions or if anything changes." David wanted to protest, to insist that he should stay awake to help navigate or at least provide company for Sarah during the long drive. But exhaustion won out, and within minutes he was asleep in the passenger seat. Sarah drove through the night, her concentration focused entirely on keeping them safe on the increasingly treacherous roads. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and several times she had to slow to a crawl as visibility dropped to almost zero. She thought about her parents, probably lying awake worrying about her. She thought about her co-workers, who would be surprised to learn about her impromptu road trip. Most of all, she thought about the sleeping soldier beside her and the sick woman waiting for him in California. Around 3 in the morning, as they crossed into Kentucky, David stirred awake. He sat up with a start, momentarily disoriented, then quickly checked his phone for the time. "How long have I been asleep?" he asked, his voice groggy. "About 4 hours," Sarah replied. "We're having a good time despite the weather. Should reach your base by 7:30, maybe 8 o'clock. David rubbed his eyes and looked out at the snow, which had finally begun to lighten slightly. "You've been driving this whole time. You must be exhausted." "I'm fine," Sarah said, though she could feel the fatigue settling into her shoulders and neck. "How are you feeling?" "Better," David admitted. "I can't remember the last time I slept that deeply. Thank you for letting me rest." They drove through the remaining darkness, talking intermittently about their families, their dreams, and their fears. Sarah learned that David had joined the military specifically to pay for Elena's education, that he sent home nearly every penny of his paycheck, and that he lay awake at night, calculating medical costs and insurance co-payments. David learned that Sarah read to her father every evening, that she had been accepted to graduate school before his stroke, but had never told him about giving up the opportunity, and that she still believed deeply in the power of education to transform lives. As dawn broke over the Kentucky hills, they found themselves on the final stretch of highway leading to Fort Campbell. The snow had stopped completely, leaving behind a world transformed into crystalline beauty. David began recognizing landmarks, and his excitement became palpable. "Take the next exit," he said, pointing to a green sign ahead. "The main gate is about 2 miles down this road." Sarah followed his directions, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness that their journey was nearly over. In the space of 8 hours, she had formed an unexpected connection with this young soldier, and she found herself genuinely invested in his success and happiness. As they approached the imposing gates of Fort Campbell, David turned to face her completely. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need you to know what you've done. This isn't just a ride. You've saved my career, my future, maybe my marriage. I don't have adequate words to thank you." Sarah pulled into the visitor parking area near the main gate and turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt profound after hours of road noise and engine rumble. "You don't need words," she said simply. "Just take care of yourself and your wife. That's enough, thanks." David shouldered his duffel bag and paused, with his hand on the door handle. "I meant what I said earlier. Someday, somehow, I'm going to find a way to repay this kindness. I promise you that." Sarah smiled. "Just pay it forward. When you see someone else who needs help, remember this moment and do what you can. That's how kindness works. It spreads." David nodded solemnly, then stepped out of the car. Sarah watched. As he approached the guard station, his posture transforming back into military bearing as he presented his identification and orders. Within minutes, he was through the gate and disappearing into the base. Sarah sat in her car for a few more minutes, processing what had just happened. She had driven through a snowstorm to help a stranger, and now she faced the long journey home. But as she started the engine and began the drive back to Cedar Falls, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of profound satisfaction that came from knowing she had made a real difference in someone's life. She had no idea that David Martinez was not just any soldier, and that her act of kindness had been witnessed by people who would ensure that her generosity would not go unnoticed or unrewarded. The drive back to Cedar Falls felt longer than the journey south, despite covering the same distance. Sarah found herself fighting fatigue as the adrenaline that had sustained her through the night began to fade. She stopped twice for coffee and once to call her mother, reassuring Linda that she was safe and on her way home. The roads had been cleared during the morning hours, making the return trip less treacherous but no less exhausting. As she crossed back into Michigan, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a Kentucky area code, and her heart skipped slightly, wondering if something had gone wrong with David's arrival at base. "Hello?" she answered, using her car's hands-free system. "Sarah, this is David. I hope I'm not bothering you." Relief flooded through her voice. "Not at all. Is everything okay? Did you make it in on time?" "I did, thanks to you. I reported in with 3 hours to spare." There was something different in David's voice, excitement mixed with disbelief. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. Something I didn't know yesterday. Something that changes everything." Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. "What do you mean?" "When I checked in with my commanding officer this morning, he asked me about my travel arrangements. I told him about missing the bus and how I almost didn't make it back on time. When I mentioned that a civilian had driven me from Michigan, he wanted details." David paused, and Sarah could hear background noise that sounded like military activity, vehicles, voices, the general bustle of a military base coming to life. "It turns out," David continued, his voice growing more animated, "my unit has been selected for a special assignment. We're being attached to a joint task force that's working directly with the Pentagon on a new veterans outreach program. The program is being overseen by someone very important, someone who takes a personal interest in stories like what happened between us." Sarah frowned, not understanding the significance. "I'm glad you're getting a good assignment, but I'm not sure what that has to do with me." "General Patricia Blackwood," David said, and his voice carried a note of awe. "Have you heard that name?" Sarah searched her memory, but came up empty. "Should I have?" "She's a 3-star general, one of the highest-ranking women in the military. But more than that, she's the daughter of Senator Robert Blackwood from Michigan, your Senator Sarah, and she's made it her personal mission to recognize and support civilians who go above and beyond to help military families." The pieces weren't quite clicking for Sarah yet. "That's wonderful, David, but I still don't understand why you're telling me this. Because when I told my commanding officer what you did, how you bought my meal, drove me 400 miles through a snowstorm, refused to accept any payment, he immediately reported it up the chain of command. Sarah, General Blackwood, wants to meet you." Sarah nearly swerved in her lane. "She wants to do what? Meet you in person today." David's excitement was unmistakable now. "Sarah, this general has the authority to award civilian commendations, to arrange scholarships, to open doors that most people can't even imagine exist. She's been looking for exactly the kind of story that you and I represent." Sarah pulled off the highway at a rest stop, needing to focus entirely on this conversation. David, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. I'm just a waitress who gave someone a ride. That's not commendation worthy. That's just normal human decency. That's exactly why it is commendation worthy, David replied firmly. Sarah, normal human decency isn't as common as it should be, and what you did went far beyond normal. You risked your safety, spent your own money, and gave up your time to help a complete stranger with no expectation of recognition or reward. Sarah sat in her parked car, engine running, trying to process this information. Even if that's true, I'm 8 hours away from you. How would I meet this general today? She's not here, David said. She's coming to you. Sarah, General Blackwood, is flying to Michigan this afternoon. She wants to meet you at your workplace, to see the place where this act of kindness began. She's flying to Cedar Falls? Sarah's voice rose an octave. David, Cedar Falls is a small town in the middle of nowhere. Generals don't fly to small towns in the middle of nowhere. This one does, David said with certainty. General Blackwood has made it her business to seek out people like you. She believes that recognizing civilian heroes is crucial for maintaining the connection between the military and the communities we serve. Sarah leaned back in her seat, overwhelmed. I don't understand any of this. Yesterday, I was worried about making rent, and now you're telling me that a general is flying across the country to meet me. Sarah, David said gently, I need you to understand something. What you did for me wasn't just personal kindness. It was profound patriotism. You helped a soldier in need, not because you had to, but because you believed it was right. That matters to people in positions to make a difference. As Sarah sat in the rest stop parking lot, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed a number with a Washington, D.C. area code. David, I'm getting another call, she said. Answer it, he urged. I think it might be important. Sarah switched over to the incoming call, her hands trembling slightly. Hello? Ms. Thompson, this is Colonel Janet Morrison calling on behalf of General Patricia Blackwood. Am I speaking with Sarah Michelle Thompson? Sarah's mouth went dry. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Thompson, I understand you provided assistance to one of our soldiers yesterday. The general would very much like to speak with you personally. Would you be available for a phone call in approximately 10 minutes? Sarah looked around the rest stop as if expecting to wake up from a dream. Yes, ma'am, I can be available. Excellent. Please expect a call from this number in 10 minutes. And Miss Thompson, thank you for what you did for Corporal Martinez. Acts of kindness like yours are exactly what we need more of in this world. The line went dead, and Sarah immediately called David back. David, I just got a call from a colonel. A colonel called me. This is really happening, isn't it? It's really happening, David confirmed. Sarah, I know this is overwhelming, but please trust me when I tell you that this is good. This is very, very good. But what does she want? What am I supposed to say to a general? Just be yourself, David advised. Tell her the truth about why you helped me. Don't try to make it sound more noble or complicated than it was. The simplicity of your kindness is what makes it so powerful. Sarah spent the next 10 minutes pacing around her car, trying to calm her nerves and organize her thoughts. She was a waitress from a small town who had helped someone in need. That was it. That was the whole story. But apparently, that simple story had caught the attention of people she had never imagined would know her name. When her phone rang again, she answered on the first ring. Ms. Thompson, this is General Patricia Blackwood. I hope you don't mind me calling you directly. The voice was crisp and authoritative, but carried an unmistakable warmth. Sarah found herself standing straighter, even though no one could see her. Not at all, General. It's an honor. The honor is mine, Miss Thompson. I've just finished reading Corporal Martinez's account of yesterday's events, and I must say I'm deeply impressed. Tell me, what motivated you to help him? Sarah took a deep breath, remembering David's advice to keep it simple. He needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. It wasn't more complicated than that. I see. And the 8-hour round-trip drive through a snowstorm, that didn't give you pause? Of course it did, Sarah admitted, but he was going to face serious consequences if he didn't get back to base on time. And his wife, she's fighting cancer, and she depends on his military benefits for her treatment. The risk to me seemed small compared to what he stood to lose. General Blackwood was quiet for a moment. Ms. Thompson, are you aware that Corporal Martinez is one of our most promising young soldiers? He's been recommended for officer training, and his superiors consider him to have exceptional leadership potential. No, ma'am, I didn't know that. He seemed like a good person who was in trouble, and that was enough for me. That's exactly what I hoped you would say, the general replied, and Sarah could hear approval in her voice. Ms. Thompson, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. If you could change anything about your current situation, your job, your education, your family's circumstances, what would it be? Sarah was startled by the directness of the question. General, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. I'm asking about your dreams. Miss Thompson, what did you want to do with your life before circumstances required you to set those dreams aside? Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. I wanted to teach. I have a degree in early childhood education, but I've never been able to use it. My family needed me to take a job that paid immediately, rather than pursuing something that might pay better, eventually. And if those financial pressures were removed, if your family's medical bills were taken care of, and you had the freedom to pursue teaching. Sarah's voice grew very quiet. That would change everything, but General, that's not how life works. We all have responsibilities, and we do what we have to do. Ms. Thompson, General Blackwood said firmly, I'm going to be in Cedar Falls this afternoon. I'm flying in specifically to meet you, and I'm bringing some people with me who I think you'll want to meet. Can you be at your workplace at 4 o'clock? Sarah checked her watch. It was just past noon, and she was still 2 hours from home. Yes, ma'am, I can be there. Excellent. And Ms. Thompson, bring your family. What I have to discuss with you will affect all of them. The line went dead, leaving Sarah standing in a rest stop parking lot, staring at her phone in complete bewilderment. In the span of 24 hours, her life had taken a turn that she could never have anticipated. She had helped a soldier get home, and somehow that simple act had caught the attention of people with the power to change everything. As she got back in her car to complete the drive home, Sarah realized that she was about to discover just how far-reaching the consequences of kindness could be. But even in her wildest imagination, she could not have predicted what General Blackwood had planned, or how dramatically her life was about to change. Sarah arrived home to find her parents sitting at the kitchen table, worry etched deeply on their faces. The moment she walked through the door, her mother stood up and embraced her tightly, the kind of hug that communicated relief, concern, and unconditional love all at once. Thank goodness you're safe, Linda whispered into her daughter's hair. I've been imagining all sorts of terrible scenarios. Michael Thompson, despite the limitations imposed by his stroke, managed to convey his own relief through his expression and the firm squeeze he gave Sarah's hand when she sat beside him. His speech had improved significantly over the past 3 years, but he still chose his words carefully. Proud of you, he said simply, his eyes reflecting the depth of emotion behind those 3 words. Did the right thing. Sarah felt tears, threatening as she looked at her parents, these 2 people who had shaped her understanding of compassion and responsibility. I need to tell you both something incredible, she began, and proceeded to explain the phone calls from David, Colonel Morrison, and General Blackwood. By the time she finished, Linda was sitting back down, her hand pressed to her chest in disbelief. A general is coming here to Cedar Falls to meet you? Linda's voice carried the same bewilderment Sarah had felt. That's what she said. And she wants you both there too. She said what she has to discuss will affect our whole family. Michael leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Don't understand," he said slowly. Why would helping one soldier bring a general here?" Sarah shook her head. "I don't understand it either, Dad. But David seems to think this General Blackwood has some kind of program for recognizing civilians who help military families. Maybe she just wants to say thank you officially." Linda glanced at the clock on the kitchen wall. "It's already past 1 o'clock. If we need to be at the cafe by 4, we should start getting ready. What does one wear to meet a general?" "I have no idea," Sarah admitted. "I suppose our best clothes." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of preparation and nervous energy. Sarah showered and changed into the only professional outfit she owned, a navy blue dress she had bought for job interviews years ago and worn to church every Sunday since. Linda helped Michael with his tie, something that had become a weekly ritual but felt more significant today. As they prepared to leave for the cafe, Sarah's phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Bob Hendrick's name. "Sarah, what in the world is happening over here?" Bob's voice carried a mixture of excitement and panic. "There are military vehicles parked outside my restaurant, and men in suits are asking questions about you." Sarah's stomach fluttered. "They're early. Bob, I'm sorry I didn't warn you sooner, but I'm bringing my parents over to meet with some military officials. It has to do with helping that soldier yesterday." "Military officials?" Bob's voice rose. "Sarah, there's a woman here in a uniform, with more medals than I've ever seen in my life, and she's asking if the interior of the cafe can accommodate what she called a small ceremony." "What kind of ceremony?" "I honestly don't know," Sarah replied. "We'll be there in 15 minutes. Can you just go along with whatever they need?" "Of course, but Sarah, this is the most excitement Cedar Falls has seen since the tornado of 2019. Half the town is gathering across the street trying to figure out what's happening." After ending the call, Sarah looked at her parents, both of whom appeared nervous but determined. "Ready?" she asked. "As ready as we can be for something we don't understand," Linda replied, adjusting Michael's collar one final time. The drive to Rosie's roadside cafe took less than 10 minutes, but as they turned onto Main Street, it became immediately apparent that this was no ordinary afternoon in Cedar Falls. Military vehicles, sleek black SUVs, and what appeared to be an official government sedan were parked in front of the cafe. Small groups of townspeople had gathered at a respectful distance, some taking pictures with their phones, others simply staring in amazement. Sarah parked behind the cafe and helped her father navigate the icy back steps. As they entered through the employee entrance, she could hear unfamiliar voices coming from the dining area, crisp, professional tones that spoke of people accustomed to authority and respect. Bob appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face flushed with excitement and nervousness. "Sarah, thank goodness. They've been waiting for you." He paused, seeming to struggle with the surreal nature of the situation. "There's a general in my restaurant, an actual general, with an entourage." Sarah took a deep breath and walked toward the dining area, her parents close behind her. What she saw when she entered the main cafe took her breath away. The space had been transformed. Several men in dark suits stood positioned around the room, their bearing and alertness clearly identifying them as security personnel. Near the counter, a woman in an immaculate military uniform stood speaking quietly with a civilian in an expensive-looking suit. The woman's uniform displayed an impressive array of ribbons and insignia, and her bearing commanded immediate respect. When the woman turned and saw Sarah, her expression shifted to one of warm recognition, despite their never having met. "Miss Thompson," she said, crossing the room with confident strides. "I'm General Patricia Blackwood. It's an honor to finally meet you in person." Sarah found herself standing straighter automatically. "The honor is mine, General. These are my parents, Linda and Michael Thompson. General Blackwood shook hands with each of them, her manner respectful and genuinely warm. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, you should be incredibly proud of your daughter. What she did yesterday represents the very best of American values." Linda managed to find her voice. "Thank you, General. We've always been proud of Sarah, but we're still not entirely sure we understand what's happening here." General Blackwood smiled. "That's understandable, and I apologize for the somewhat dramatic nature of this visit. Please, let's all sit down, and I'll explain everything." She gestured toward a large table that had been set up in the center of the cafe, clearly arranged for this meeting. As they took their seats, the general introduced the civilian who had been standing with her. "This is Dr. Amanda Richardson from the Blackwood Foundation. She's here because what I'm about to discuss with you involves more than just military recognition." Dr. Richardson, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an air of quiet competence, nodded to the Thompson family. "It's wonderful to meet all of you," she said. General Blackwood opened a leather portfolio that had been sitting on the table. "Miss Thompson, yesterday you performed an act of extraordinary kindness for Corporal David Martinez. What you may not know is that Corporal Martinez is not just any soldier. He's been identified as one of our most promising young leaders, someone who we believe will have a significant impact on the military and eventually on civilian leadership as well." She paused, allowing this information to settle. "More importantly, your actions yesterday were witnessed, in a sense, by more than just Corporal Martinez. You see, the entire story, from your initial kindness in the cafe to your decision to drive him through a snowstorm, was recorded on the cafe's security system." Sarah glanced at Bob, who looked sheepish. "I told them about the cameras when they asked," he said apologetically. "Mr. Hendricks was entirely appropriate in sharing that information," General Blackwood assured him. "And I'm glad he did, because it allowed us to verify every detail of Corporal Martinez's account. What we saw on that footage was remarkable. Not just the act of kindness itself, but the way you conducted yourself throughout the entire interaction." Dr. Richardson leaned forward slightly. "Sarah, may I call you Sarah? The Blackwood Foundation exists specifically to identify and support individuals who demonstrate exceptional character in service to others. We've been searching for someone." "Exactly like you. I don't understand," Sarah said quietly. "I'm just a waitress. I helped someone who needed help. That's not exceptional. That's just what people should do." "And that," General Blackwood said with emphasis, "is precisely why you are exceptional. You see no distinction between what people should do and what you personally are willing to do. That's extraordinarily rare." The general opened her portfolio and removed several documents. "Sarah, I'm here to offer you something that I hope will allow you to pursue your dreams while continuing to make the kind of difference you made yesterday, but on a much larger scale." She placed the first document in front of Sarah. "This is a full scholarship to any university in the United States, covering not just tuition, but also living expenses for yourself and support for your family. The scholarship is renewable for undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral studies." Sarah stared at the document, the words seeming to blur together. This can't be real." Dr. Richardson placed a second document on the table. "This is a grant from the Blackwood Foundation to cover your father's medical expenses, all of them, including treatments not covered by insurance, for the rest of his life." Linda gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. General Blackwood placed a third document in front of them. "And this is an offer of employment. Sarah, we want you to work with us developing programs that connect military families with civilian support networks. It's a position that would allow you to use your education background while making a national impact." Sarah looked around the table at the faces of her parents, then at the general and Dr. Richardson. I don't understand how this is possible. One act of kindness can't possibly merit all of this. One act of kindness from the right person at the right time can change the world, General Blackwood replied. Sarah, we've been looking for someone with your combination of compassion, integrity, and practical wisdom. Someone who understands both struggle and service. Someone who acts on their values, even when no one is watching. She leaned back in her chair, her expression growing more personal. I should tell you something else. I grew up not far from here, in a family that struggled with medical bills and financial hardship. I know what it's like to have dreams that seem impossible because of circumstances beyond your control. The opportunities I'm offering you today, they're the opportunities I wish someone had offered my family when I was your age. Michael Thompson, who had been listening intently throughout the conversation, spoke up with careful deliberation. Sarah helped because that's who she is, not for recognition, not for reward. You understand that? General Blackwood turned to face him directly. Mr. Thompson, that's exactly why we want to help her. People who act from genuine compassion, without thought of personal gain, are the people we need leading programs designed to help others. Your daughter doesn't just talk about kindness, she lives it. That's what makes her invaluable. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. Can I have some time to think about this? Of course, Dr. Richardson said gently. These are life-changing decisions, but I want you to know that there are no strings attached to any of these offers. The medical coverage for your father begins immediately, regardless of what you decide. About the scholarship or the job, that's already been arranged. As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and saw David's name. It's from Corporal Martinez, she said. Read it aloud if you don't mind, General Blackwood requested. Sarah opened the message and read, Sarah, I just heard about General Blackwood's visit. I want you to know that everything happening today started because you chose to see me as a person worth helping when I felt invisible and forgotten. Thank you for giving me my life back. Elena sends her love too. She can't wait to meet the woman who saved her husband's career and maybe their future. Whatever happens today, you've already changed our world. Thank you. The cafe fell silent for a moment, the weight of those words settling over everyone present. General Blackwood smiled. And that, Sarah, is why you're sitting here today. Because sometimes one person's decision to choose kindness over indifference can create ripples that extend far beyond what anyone could imagine. As Sarah looked around the table at these powerful, accomplished people who had traveled hundreds of miles to meet her, she began to understand that her life was about to change in ways she had never dared to dream possible. Bob Hendricks, who had been standing quietly near the kitchen door throughout the meeting, finally found his voice. General, if I may ask, how did you learn about all this so quickly? Sarah only helped that young man yesterday. General Blackwood turned toward him with appreciation for the question. That's an excellent point, Mr. Hendricks. The truth is, we have systems in place to identify stories like this. When Corporal Martinez reported to his commanding officer this morning, the story was immediately flagged because of his unit's involvement in our Veterans Outreach program. But more than that, we've been actively searching for civilians who demonstrate the exact qualities Sarah showed yesterday. She gestured toward Dr. Richardson. The Blackwood Foundation has been developing a new initiative for the past 2 years, one designed to identify and support individuals who make extraordinary sacrifices to help military families. We've had teams monitoring various channels, social media, local news, military reports, looking for authentic stories of civilian heroism. Dr. Richardson nodded, adding, what made Sarah's story so compelling wasn't just the magnitude of her sacrifice, but the complete absence of any attempt to publicize it. She didn't post about it on social media, didn't contact local news, didn't seek recognition in any way. That kind of genuine altruism is what we've been hoping to find. Linda Thompson had been listening intently, but now she spoke up with the protective instinct of a mother. This all sounds wonderful, but I have to ask, what's expected of Sarah in return? Nothing in life is truly free. General Blackwood's expression grew more serious, appreciating the directness of the question. Mrs. Thompson, that's a fair and important question. Let me be completely transparent about our expectations. She turned to address Sarah directly. If you accept the position we're offering, you would be working to develop and implement programs that connect military families with civilian support networks. It's meaningful work, but it's also demanding work. She paused, ensuring she had everyone's attention. You would be traveling to different communities, speaking with military families about their needs, and working with local organizations to create sustainable support systems. You'd be writing reports, presenting findings to congressional committees, and essentially becoming a bridge between military and civilian communities. Sarah felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. That sounds like exactly the kind of work I've always wanted to do, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for something so important. Your qualifications aren't measured in degrees or certifications, Dr. Richardson interjected. They're measured in your instinctive understanding of what people need and your willingness to provide it. Yesterday you saw a soldier in distress and immediately recognized both his immediate need and the broader implications of his situation. That's the kind of insight we need. General Blackwood opened another folder and removed a tablet computer. I'd like to show you something, Sarah. This is a presentation we've been developing about the disconnect between military and civilian communities. One of our biggest challenges is that many civilians want to support military families, but don't know how, while military families often struggle in silence because they don't want to appear weak or needy. She turned the tablet toward the Thompson family, showing a series of statistics and graphs. These numbers represent the gap we're trying to bridge. Military families dealing with financial hardship, medical crises, deployment stress, and reintegration challenges. On the other side, civilian communities with resources, goodwill, and a desire to help, but no effective way to connect with those who need assistance. Sarah studied the data, her expression growing more focused. These numbers, they're heartbreaking. Look at this percentage of military families who've had to choose between medical care and basic necessities. Exactly, General Blackwood said with approval. You see the human impact immediately. That's what makes you perfect for this role. We need someone who can look at data and see the individual stories behind the statistics. Michael Thompson had been listening carefully, and now he struggled to form his words precisely. Sarah would be good at this work. She's always seen people others miss. His wife nodded in agreement. Even as a child, she brought home stray animals, befriended the lonely kids at school, and noticed when neighbors were struggling. It's just who she is. Dr. Richardson smiled warmly. That natural empathy, combined with her educational background and life experience, creates a unique perspective. Sarah understands both the academic theory of community support and the practical reality of family crisis. General Blackwood closed the tablet and looked directly at Sarah. There's something else I want you to understand about this opportunity. This position would put you at the forefront of a national conversation about military-civilian relations. You'd be working with senators, congresspeople, military leadership, and community organizations across the country. It's not just a job, it's a platform to make systemic change. Sarah felt simultaneously thrilled and terrified by the scope of what was being described. General, I have to be honest. The idea of working with senators and military leadership is intimidating. I'm someone who spent the last 6 years taking coffee orders and serving breakfast. How can you be sure I won't disappoint you? Because, General Blackwood replied without hesitation. Yesterday you made a decision that perfectly demonstrates the qualities we need. You saw someone in need. You assessed what you could do to help, and you acted without regard for personal cost or recognition. Those are the exact same qualities required for effective leadership in the program we're developing. She leaned forward, her tone becoming more personal. Sarah, I've worked with politicians, generals, and policy experts who have impressive credentials but lack the fundamental understanding of human nature that you demonstrated yesterday. Theory and experience are valuable, but they're meaningless without genuine compassion and the courage to act on it. Bob Hendricks, who had been absorbing this extraordinary conversation, suddenly spoke up. Sarah, can I say something? Everyone turned toward him, and he looked slightly embarrassed by the attention, but continued. I've watched you work for 6 years. I've seen you handle difficult customers with patience, comfort crying children, remember the names of truckers who stop by once a month, and somehow make everyone feel welcome and valued. You think what you did yesterday was unusual, but the truth is, you do extraordinary things for people every single day. You just don't realize it because it's so natural to you. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. Bob, that's just doing my job. No, he said firmly, that's doing your job with your whole heart. There's a difference, and everyone who's ever been in this cafe knows it. General Blackwood nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I mean, Sarah. You don't compartmentalize your compassion or save it for special occasions. It's integrated into everything you do. That's what makes you extraordinary. Dr. Richardson retrieved another document from her briefcase. Sarah, I want to show you something that might help you understand the broader impact of what we're proposing. She placed a thick folder on the table. These are letters from military families who have been helped by early pilot programs similar to what we want you to lead. Sarah opened the folder and began reading. The first letter was from a military spouse whose husband had been deployed for 15 months while she struggled with a seriously ill child and no family support nearby. A civilian volunteer network had provided practical help, childcare during medical appointments, meal preparation, assistance with household maintenance, but more importantly, they had provided emotional support and friendship during an impossibly difficult time. The second letter was from a veteran dealing with post-traumatic stress who had been connected with a civilian mentor, someone who helped him navigate the transition back to civilian employment while providing non-judgmental support during his recovery process. As Sarah read letter after letter, each describing how civilian involvement had made crucial differences in military families' lives, she began to see the full picture of what was being offered to her. These stories, she said quietly, they're exactly what David was going through yesterday. The feeling of being isolated, of carrying burdens that seem impossible to share. Precisely, General Blackwood confirmed. And your instinctive response to his situation, to see the person behind the uniform, to recognize the human need beneath the military bearing, that's the foundation of everything we're trying to accomplish. Linda Thompson had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding. Sarah, she said gently, this isn't just about recognizing what you did yesterday. They're offering you the chance to spend your life doing work that matters, work that's perfectly suited to who you are. Sarah looked at her parents, seeing hope and pride in their expressions despite their earlier concerns. Then she looked at General Blackwood and Dr. Richardson, these accomplished women who had seen something in her that she was only beginning to recognize in herself. If I were to accept this position, she said slowly, how would it work practically? Where would I be based? How often would I travel? What about my family's needs here? General Blackwood smiled, clearly pleased by the practical nature of the questions. The position is flexible by design. You'd have a home office here in Michigan with travel as needed, but never more than 1 week per month initially. As the program grows and you become more comfortable with the responsibilities, you might choose to travel more, but that would always be your decision. Dr. Richardson added, "The salary is designed to provide financial security for your entire family. You'd never again have to choose between pursuing meaningful work and meeting your family's practical needs. That's intentional. We want you focused on the mission, not worried about bills." Sarah felt something shifting inside her, a growing sense that this conversation represented more than just an unexpected opportunity. It felt like a doorway opening to the life she had always wanted, but never believed possible. "There's one more thing I need to know," she said. "David Martinez." "Corporal Martinez, what happens to him? Does accepting this position somehow obligate him to anything?" General Blackwood's expression grew warm with approval at the question. "Corporal Martinez continues with his military service exactly as planned. His officer training proceeds on schedule, his wife continues receiving her medical care, and their lives move forward. The only difference is that your act of kindness has been officially recognized and has opened doors for both of you to make broader impacts." She paused, then added, "Although I should mention that Corporal Martinez specifically asked me to tell you that he and his wife would love to stay in touch if you're comfortable with that. They consider you family now." Sarah felt her heart swell with emotion. In the span of 48 hours, her understanding of what was possible in her life had been completely transformed, all because she had chosen to be kind to a stranger who needed help. The weight of the moment settled over the cafe like a warm blanket. Sarah sat surrounded by the most important decision of her life. While outside the windows, the people of Cedar Falls continued to gather, drawn by curiosity about the military presence that had transformed their quiet Main Street into something resembling a scene from a movie. General Blackwood seemed to sense Sarah's need for a moment to process everything. "Sarah, why don't you take a few minutes to discuss this with your parents privately? Dr. Richardson and I can step outside, give you some space to talk through what this means for your family." "Actually," Sarah said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice, "I don't need time to think about it. I know my answer." Linda and Michael exchanged glances, both recognizing the tone their daughter used when she had made up her mind about something important. It was the same voice she had used when she decided to defer graduate school to help with the family finances. The same determination she had shown when she took on double shifts to cover her father's medical expenses. The scholarship, the medical, and coverage for Dad, the job opportunity, it's all more generous than I could have imagined, Sarah continued. But I need you to understand something, General. I'm not accepting these offers because of what you can do for me. I'm accepting them because of what they'll allow me to do for others. General Blackwood's expression shifted to one of deep respect. That's exactly the response I hoped to hear. Tell me more. Sarah stood up from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the crowd that had gathered. She could see Mrs. Henderson from the diner's Tuesday morning routine, standing next to the hardware store owner, Danny Rodriguez, who had fixed her family's roof. There was the night shift nurse from the hospital, still in her scrubs, and the construction foreman, who always ordered his eggs over easy. "Look at these people," she said, gesturing toward the window. "This is what a community looks like. These are the people who helped my family when we needed it, who supported each other through hard times, who understand that we're all connected." She turned back to face the group. Military families deserve to have this same kind of support network. No matter where they're stationed, Dr. Richardson made a note on her tablet. That's a beautiful way to conceptualize the mission. You're talking about replicating organic community support in situations where geographic mobility makes it difficult to develop naturally. Exactly, Sarah said, feeling her excitement build as the vision became clearer. David told me that he and his wife felt isolated, like they were carrying their burdens alone. But that's not because people don't want to help. It's because systems don't exist to connect those who need help with those who want to provide it. Michael Thompson struggled to his feet, his movements careful but determined. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. Sarah, this is what you were meant to do, not just the helping, but the organizing, the connection. You've always been the bridge. His wife nodded, tears forming in her eyes. Even as a little girl, you were always bringing people together. The kid who got everyone to include the new student, who organized neighborhood cleanups, who somehow made everyone feel like they belonged. General Blackwood exchanged a meaningful look with Dr. Richardson. Sarah, there's something else we should discuss. This position comes with significant responsibility, but it also comes with significant authority. You'd have a budget to allocate, programs to design, and teams to lead. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility? Sarah thought about the past 6 years of managing shifts at the cafe, coordinating her father's medical appointments, balancing impossible budgets, and somehow keeping her family afloat through crisis after crisis. General, I've been managing complex situations with limited resources for years. The difference is that now I'd have adequate resources to actually solve problems instead of just surviving them. And you're not intimidated by the prospect of working with high-ranking officials, congressional committees, and military leadership? Sarah smiled for the first time since the meeting began. Yesterday I drove through a snowstorm with a soldier I'd known for 6 hours because it was the right thing to do. If I can do that, I think I can handle a few meetings with politicians. Dr. Richardson laughed appreciatively. I think you're going to fit in perfectly with our team. We value practical wisdom and real-world experience over traditional credentials. Bob Hendricks, who had been listening from his position near the kitchen, cleared his throat. If I may, I'd like to say something. Everyone turned toward him and he continued. Sarah, you've made this place special for 6 years. Customers drive out of their way to eat here, not because the food is extraordinary, but because you make them feel valued and cared for. If you can do that on a national scale, imagine the impact you'll have. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for Bob's support, but also a pang of concern. Bob, what will you do about staffing? I know how hard it is to find reliable people, and I don't want to leave you in a difficult position. Bob waved away her concern. Sarah, you've trained half the waitstaff in this county over the years. Jessica is ready for more hours, and I've got 3 applications from people who want to work here specifically because of the reputation you've built for this place. You don't need to worry about us. We'll be fine. General Blackwood stood up and walked to her briefcase, returning with an elegant leather portfolio. Sarah, if you're ready to make this official, I have some paperwork for you to review and sign. But before we do that, I want to make sure you understand the full scope of what you're committing to. She opened the portfolio and removed a detailed job description. Your official title would be Director of Civilian Military Community Integration. You'd be responsible for developing pilot programs in 5 different states initially, with the goal of expanding nationally within 3 years. You'd have a staff of 12 people working under your direction, and you'd report directly to my office. Sarah scanned the document, noting the salary figure that was more than double what she had ever imagined earning. This salary, it's more than my family has ever had in total annual income. It's commensurate with the responsibility and impact of the position, Dr. Richardson explained. We want you focused on the mission, not worried about financial security. Linda Thompson spoke up with the practical concern of a mother. What about benefits? Health insurance? Retirement planning? General Blackwood smiled. Comprehensive benefits package, including health insurance that covers pre-existing conditions with no waiting period. Dr. Thompson, your husband's medical needs would be fully covered from day one, with access to specialists and treatments that might not be available locally. Michael's eyes widened slightly. Better doctors? Better treatments? The best available, General Blackwood confirmed. Military medical facilities, private specialists, experimental treatments if appropriate, whatever gives you the best chance for continued recovery and quality of life. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the generosity, but also by the weight of what was being entrusted to her. General, I have to ask, why are you investing so much in me? This level of support, this opportunity, it's extraordinary. What if I fail? What if I'm not as capable as you think I am? General Blackwood's expression grew serious. Sarah, failure is always a possibility in any endeavor worth pursuing. But we're not investing in you because we think you're perfect or because we believe you'll never make mistakes. We're investing in you because yesterday, when faced with a choice between comfort and compassion, between self-interest and service, you chose the harder path without hesitation. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. That kind of moral courage can't be taught in leadership seminars or business schools. It's either part of who you are or it isn't. And yesterday, you proved beyond any doubt that it's part of who you are. Dr. Richardson nodded in agreement. The technical skills required for this position can be learned. Strategic thinking can be developed. The presentation skills can be improved. But the fundamental character that drives someone to sacrifice, for strangers, that's rare, and it's exactly what we need. Sarah looked around the table at these remarkable people who had entered her life so unexpectedly, then at her parents who were watching her with expressions of pride and encouragement. Finally, she looked out the window again, at the community that had shaped her understanding of mutual support and shared responsibility. "There's one condition," she said finally. "I want David Martinez and his wife to be involved in this program somehow. Not because of any obligation, but because they understand both sides of what we're trying to accomplish. David knows what it's like to need help, and I suspect Elena knows what it's like to be the civilian support system for a military family." General Blackwood's smile was immediate and approving. Already thinking strategically about team building and stakeholder involvement, "Yes, I think we can arrange for them to be part of the program. In fact, their perspective would be invaluable." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling as though she was standing at the edge of a precipice, about to leap into a future she had never dared to imagine. "Then yes, I accept. All of it. The scholarship, the position, the responsibility. I'm ready to get started." The next few minutes were a whirlwind of paperwork, signatures, and official documentation. General Blackwood explained that Sarah would begin with a 2-week orientation program in Washington, D.C., followed by training sessions on program development, federal contracting procedures, and military protocol. "Your first assignment," Dr. Richardson explained, "will be to conduct a comprehensive assessment of existing civilian military support programs in Michigan. We want to understand what's working, what isn't, and where the gaps are. It's perfect for someone with your background because you understand both the civilian community perspective and now the military family experience." As the official business concluded, Sarah felt a strange mixture of excitement and surreal disbelief. This morning she had been a waitress worried about paying bills. Now she was a federal employee with the authority to design programs that could impact thousands of families. General Blackwood gathered her papers and prepared to leave. "Sarah, there's one more thing I want you to understand. This opportunity exists because you chose kindness over convenience yesterday, but the impact you'll have in this position will exist because of the choices you make every day going forward. The real work starts now. I understand, Sarah replied, and I'm ready for it. As the military entourage prepared to depart, Bob approached Sarah with a small wrapped package. "This is for you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have something to remember this place by." Sarah unwrapped the package to find a framed photograph of the cafe, taken on a busy morning when the breakfast rush was in full swing. In the background, barely visible, she could see herself serving coffee to a table of construction workers, her expression focused and caring. "Thank you, Bob, for everything, for giving me a job when I needed one, for trusting me, for supporting me today." "Thank you," he replied, "for showing all of us what real character looks like." As the military vehicles pulled away from the cafe, the crowd of townspeople gradually dispersed, many stopping to congratulate Sarah and her family on what they had witnessed. Mrs. Henderson hugged Sarah tightly, whispering, "I always knew you were destined for something special." That evening, as the Thompson family sat around their kitchen table, the events of the day still felt dreamlike. The paperwork was spread across the table: scholarship documents, employment contracts, medical insurance forms that promised to transform their lives. "I still can't believe this is real," Linda said, shaking her head in wonder. "It's real because Sarah made it real," Michael replied, his words carefully chosen but deeply felt. "Yesterday, she chose to be who she is. Today, the world recognized it." Sarah looked at her parents, these two people who had taught her everything important about life, love, and responsibility. "This doesn't change who we are as a family," she said firmly. "It just means we'll have the resources to help more people, to make a bigger difference." Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from David Martinez. "Sarah, Elena and I just heard the news. We're so proud and so grateful. You've given us our future back. And now you're going to do the same thing for countless other families. You're going to change the world." As Sarah read the message aloud to her parents, she realized that David was right. She was going to change the world, one act of kindness at a time, one family at a time, one community at a time. The waitress who had bought a soldier's meal had become a bridge between two worlds that desperately needed to understand each other better. And it all started with the simple decision to see a stranger as someone worth helping. Sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the most ordinary acts of human kindness. Sarah's journey was just beginning, but she already knew that. Every step would be guided by the same principle that had brought her to this moment. When someone needs help, and you have the ability to provide it, you act. Everything else is just details. The next morning, Sarah would begin a new chapter of her life, but she would carry with her the lessons learned in a small cafe in Cedar Falls, Michigan, where she discovered that kindness has the power to transform not just individual lives, but the entire world. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.